Thanks for tuning in to the Urban Scope podcast. I'm back with another exciting sports topic or a debate that we can have. Now, I've been seeing lately conversations surrounding T Mac, Tracy McGrady, one of the all time greats as far as scoring goes and just being an exciting basketball player. When you think about the talent that he had, he's probably one of the most interesting or fascinating players this side, on that side of Allen Iverson that we can go back to in NBA history. For the simple fact of when you talk about the ring debate, he's not included in that. But when you talk about everything else, he's included in that. Being a 30-point scorer, 40-point scorer, being just fascinating from his play, throwing, the basketball off the backboard and dunking it, just being innovative and just his style of play and how laid back and chill he was. But he was such a great scorer. So he didn't give off the facade like he was this, Michael Jordan or Kobe type mentality, but he definitely gave off the same amount of points and his skill set demanded your respect or the team's respects. But he's always left off the top conversation because of his ability not to win the big rings or win the championship. But everything else he accomplished. So where do you rank a T Mac in the all time greats? Because you do have to consider rings in, but you have to consider your ability to score, your ability to defend, which he wasn't really known as a defender, but as a 6'8" guy, naturally defense came second nature to him just by, virtue of just having his wingspan and just being that tall. But for the most part, he wasn't a slouch on defense, that most would say. But his offensive prowess is what he's known for. But he was definitely one of the most prolific scorers in the league history, even dating to now. And he probably was a little bit ahead of his time. In his era, they really didn't shoot threes a lot, but he did. So he was able to benefit off that a lot. But unfortunately, he was in the same era that Shaquille O'Neal was in, Kobe, Shaq, LeBron, Wade, Iverson, even Yao Ming, who was his teammate for a little bit in Houston. He had other players that were overshadowing him despite his greatness. But in the midst of all that greatness, he still was great and still gave great performances. But it's just up to debate or your preference on who you like more when you debating Iverson and stuff like that. Because when they say Iverson, he took a team that was less than similar to what LeBron did in Cleveland against that San Antonio Spurs team in '04. um, Iverson did that in '01 when he took that Philly team against the Lakers and they actually stole game one, but then, they didn't win any more games after that. So T Mac has not been able to do that, but I'll talk about in a little bit about the teams that he had and the infrastructure that he lacked. Not saying that Philly had the most supportive system, but we know T Mac started in Toronto and then he went to Houston and he went to Orlando, and none of those franchises really wanted to win. They wanted to sell tickets more than anything and just be competitive, but they really wasn't trying to win the big rings. They weren't trying to win a championship. But T Mac was almost a 20-point scorer in the regular season. He averaged 22 points a game in the playoffs that he played in. So he was definitely up there in the scoring. But when you think about the other things, they talk about the intangibles, the willingness to win, the leadership, just the fortuitiveness that maybe a Kobe, that Jordan definitely had. Iverson had it to the degree. They don't talk about him in that matter. So where do we rank T Mac? Because T Mac had to compete with the best and then be compared to the best, and he got kind of lost in the shuffle of all of that. Dealing with Kobe in his prime and then LeBron in his prime as well, or towards his prime. So he had to deal with all of that. But even his teammates got more shine. Like I said before, when you think about Vince Carter, they got more shine as well. But T Mac had moments like everybody else, but his moments were, like I said before, throwing it off the backboard, dunking it. That was one of the first things we saw from him. And then he also had the 13 points that he scored in like 35 seconds, which is phenomenal to do, and that's in game time seconds. So it was pretty phenomenal to see him do that. He was just on a terror streak back then. But as far as T Mac goes, I want to say, and it's tricky because he played the guard and forward position because he was that versatile to do that. But I think when you talk about in tops, in regards of rankings and top tens, he has to be somewhere in the top 10 forwards of all time or in the top 10 guards of all time. And definitely top 30 overall of all time or top 40, even though I don't think he was included in that top 75. But from the players that I've seen and witnessed, he's definitely in my top 30, off the sheer impact that he had, the ability he had to change a game, even though it might not have led to winning in the playoffs, i.e., a James Harden, or, to a degree, i.e., a Carmelo Anthony. These players had a great impact, but they didn't have the pieces around them. Because I talked about the Toronto team. The Toronto team was great, but you can only really name Vince Carter on that team. And a Houston team, you can really only name Yao Ming, maybe a couple pieces there, and then that Orlando team, I'm not really even sure who was on that team. So he was the standout of all of his teams, and people don't realize he came out of high school as well. So he wasn't um he didn't go through the college process like most players did. There's only a couple of players that were been very successful without that college route. LeBron, you had Kevin Garnett, um, you had Kobe, you had players like that, but for the most part, those high school players had it rough in the league for the most part. And there's only maybe six that you can truly name that were really successful without the college route or without some kind of overseas play because they didn't learn how to win and they didn't know how to deal with certain things. And that college route kind of prepared them for that. But T Mac was one of those ones that did make it out, especially in his era when they stopped doing, straight out of high school players. He was one of the last ones to get to do that process. So it was very interesting to see him be able to do that. But it just showed you how good he was to be able to come out of high school to make to become, I'm pretty sure he's going to be a Hall of Famer one day. But yeah, I do rank T Mac top 10 guard and top forward of all times that I've seen play, especially in that small forward range. But you can't put him over Melo and LeBron and Tim Duncan's and stuff like that. But yeah, he can go somewhere in the top 10 forwards and top 10 guards. So tell me, what do you think is your top 10 of all time as far as rankings go? And where does T Mac go? And until next time, I'll see you next time.